was struck in your book about the number of both infectious and non-infectious chronic diseases that you've associated with, to some degree or another, with the microbiome. We've got a question here from KCW, who says, "Good evening. Is there a known cause or hypothesis for what is causing the microbiome crisis, and therefore how do we avoid it or deal with it in infants?"
Oh, that's a peach of a question, and I'll do my best. I'll do my best to answer it. So I think you have to think about it in terms of climate crisis, right? So if you think about the sort of planetary climate crisis, of course, there's not one factor. There's multiple factors that drive it, and our internal climate crisis is just the same. However, having said that, I think there's a couple of really big players that are very, very important. The first has to be antibiotic misuse. So we consume massive amounts of antibiotics globally. We consume about 38 billion daily doses of antibiotics each year. The majority of those antibiotics are not consumed in adults, they're consumed in children, and actually they're consumed in low and middle income countries with rapid growth in China and India, where they're not regulated and they're handed out. The other problem with antibiotics is that the majority are not used in healthcare, they're used in farming, and they're used as antimicrobial growth products in countries where there isn't effective regulation, or they're used in animal husbandry. And for that reason, they're soaked into our soil, they're soaked into our oceanic systems, they're just everywhere. You can't really escape antibiotics now, and that's a huge problem. The second major driver is polypharmacy. So we don't really think about the medicines that our patients maybe take as being antimicrobial, but many of them are, probably well over a quarter of them are. And we take a lot of drugs globally. So, we take 4 trillion doses of medicine each year globally, which means that across the planet, half the world's population takes a drug every single day. And many of these drugs are changing the microbiome and having an antimicrobial effect. By the way, many of those drugs are their mechanisms are determined by the microbiome. It's just that we don't think about them in that way. Of course, we are urbanized. 6 billion of us, I think, are going to live in urbanized systems by 2050. And urbanization has a very, very big impact on our microbiome, not just because we live in different social environments and that we're exposed to different pollutants, which also shape and change the microbiome, but our social network changes. So your microbiome is defined by your family network, the number of people within it, and how many of them you share your food with or you share social interactions with. It's shaped by your social network. I don't mean by your digital social network, I mean by your real world network. So teenagers that have big friend groups have a much more diverse microbiome than those that do not. So we are lonely in the modern world, and that has a big impact on our microbiome. The fourth thing is diet. So nutrition and diet, of course, is important. It's important both in the manufacture of food, as I've described, because to manufacture the massive amount of meat that we insist on consuming takes a lot of antibiotics. And of course, our reliance on subsistence farming and pesticides has a big impact on the microbiome, but also the way that we consume food and the type of food that we consume. So a westernized diet, classically high in animal fats, low in fiber. We eat a lot of refined sugar. We have a lot of additives in our foods, of course, and ultra processed ingredients. All of these things have a very dramatic effect on our microbiome. Now, there are some other factors, so global migration, for example, and various others. But I think those are kind of the main ones, and probably the ones that are most actionable.